Hi, and welcome back to another Magicavoxel tutorial video. This one's going to be a little bit different. I'm going to be showing a time-lapse video while giving commentary over my work process in this scene creation. Usually, I would like to give live commentary while making the art, but it's kind of hard to juggle both speaking and also thinking about what I want to put in a scene. So I decided to try this out. I actually had a viewer in my last video comment on trying this, where I would give commentary over parts of the video I did. So I'm going to try that. With that, I hope you enjoy the video. So for this actual scene, I didn't really have any references to go off of. I kind of just thought something in my head and I tried to recreate it as closely as I could based on memory. I do encourage beginners who are doing Magicavoxel to look up references. For instance, if you wanted to make a rusted cardboard box, if you wanted to make a rusted metal crate or something, you would probably go on Google Images and search up rust and see how rust behaves on certain metal processes. Right now what I'm doing was I actually used a software called JS Placement to import a large height map into my scene to give the bottom some sort of sci-fi ruined, just something to fill the bottom part of the ground with. And there's actually a video on my YouTube channel. I think it was called Sci-fi Texturing, and it uses JS Placement. So if you guys wanted to use JS Placement in your scenes, you can check that video out. I'll leave it in the description as well as in this video. And you can really do a lot with JS Placement. You can make like random props and shapes relatively quickly using that method. And it's great for sci-fi scenes. So what you saw there was I was thinking of adding a height map so that this sci-fi scene could have some sort of context, but I decided to ditch that idea. It probably would have taken too long and I didn't really know how to implement it. So I decided just to stick to the one room isometric scene. So right now I'm adding a bunch of textures and patterns onto the walls of my sci-fi scene. And whenever you're building sci-fi scenes, at least, and you want it to look somewhat realistic, if you're going for the realistic art style, you want to populate the space as much as you can. You want to really fill up your working space with as much detail as possible, whether it be textures or like additions and stuff barging out of the walls. Because sometimes, you can have sci-fi scenes with just plain slate walls, but it doesn't really look good, I found out. And if you add more detail to your walls, it really makes the scene pop out and gives your scene a lot more of a story. I also like to add things hanging from the roof, like beams and bars and stuff like that. However, if you're going for the isometric look, you want to avoid bars that are too that take up too much of the roof, because you won't be able to see your scene clearly if you have bars just hanging everywhere on your roof. So right here I'm just using a combination of both grabbing assets that I created earlier using JS Placement and the pattern brush to put these assets onto the walls, and I'm using the erase and attach modes to either carve out some of the wall or put on some additions to the wall to make it more dynamic. Now this scene could have taken way longer if I didn't use tools like copy and pasting objects. So you would create, in this case I'm creating a bunch of lines on top of the walls, and you create 1 or 2 lines and then you copy and paste it, and now you have 4 lines, and you copy and paste it again, you have 8 for one object, and then you can use that to block out parts of your scene quickly. And it's almost like using the pattern brush, and I really encourage you to do this method because it makes making scenes way faster than if you were just to manipulate one object. You could see for probably half of this voxel scene process, I didn't really use too many colors. I just used colors, maybe 2 or 3 colors, to differentiate what materials I wanted that color to be. Because if you start putting in colors here and there, you'll get too focused on the details and not on the overall scene, and it'll just make the composition and the scene not look fluid. So it's important to really get a good basis on what your scene is going to look like with your models in place. So you should really stick to 1 to 3 colors or so. The 2 colors you can use for materials that you want different, so like glass or a metal or a light object. So right now I'm doing clouds, and clouds are a little bit funky because in Magicavoxel you have to turn on some settings to really get the cloud effect working. So I'll put a picture on the side to show you what settings you need on to make the clouds look the clouds I have in my picture. And it's important to note that when you have clouds in your scene and then you go to render it, it's going to take a lot more time to render those clouds and your scene than it would to just render the scene. So once you get the clouds looking the way you want, but you still want to work on your scene, I encourage you to put clouds on a separate layer so you can hide the clouds, and so when you work on your scene, you won't have to render the clouds as well until the final product. So for this scene, I didn't want it looking too bright. I wanted to make it look atmospheric, so I put most of the light coming from the entrance. I wanted the entrance and the hallway that lead to the outlook be the most in focus, so that's where I put the most light source. It's also a good idea to give your viewer a place to rest their eyes, or the light kind of helps the viewer guide themselves through the scene. So just keep that in mind when you make scenes. There's always composition and form involved. So now I'm moving on to one of my most fun parts of Magicavoxel, and that's adding light sources. I just like what you can do with the emission shader, and is what really got me into voxel art in the first place. The way the light works, as well as Magicavoxel's rendering engine, really creates some nice eye candy that motivates me to continue making voxel art. So right around here you can see me experimenting with what I wanted to do with some parts of the scene, and this is something that I encourage people to do. It doesn't hurt to put your ideas on the scene, and even if it doesn't work, yeah, you wasted a little bit of time, but it at least gets you to visualize what works and what doesn't. Now as I'm texturing the scene, it's important to take note of a couple of things. One is I'm using colors that are similar to the base color I used. So in this case I'm using like a light grayish color, and I wanted to go for like a little like corrosion rust. Like I wanted to show that there was wear and that this sci-fi area was not in pristine condition, and I picked 2 or 3 colors for that, but no more than 5. What I'm saying is don't go crazy with trying to choose like 25 different colors to create some textures, because it won't turn out right. 2 or 3 colors is enough to make the textures work, and when you're adding, like in this case like corrosion and rust, you want to use the voxel mode and put individual voxels down instead of like cube or the face mode, and you kind of just like go crazy and just click and drag the mouse around. So unless you're making art for a game that you're going to use, you can kind of cheat and not texture or model much of the stuff that's not in view. So if you get a camera position that you like, anything that's not in the camera position you kind of don't have to do. Obviously for light, it's important to still put light sources, because light, while you can't see the lamp will reflect and emit light, and if you don't put light in the areas that you can't see, then it doesn't work right, because the light is still there. So you can kind of get away with saving some time by not texturing areas that are not in view of the camera. So in order to go for that sci-fi ruined look, I decided to add vegetation, and most of it was on the ground, and no more than like 8 or 9 different vegetation assets. I have a vegetation asset pack on my Patreon, which is free for everyone to download. You don't have to be a Patreon subscriber to get access to that. So if you'd like to check out my Patreon to get access to the vegetation asset pack, I'll leave a link in this video. So after adding the vegetation, I just went around the scene to see if I needed to add additional textures or model some more stuff to fill up some empty space, as well as to add in several light sources, although these light sources would not be the primary light source. They would just serve as little kind of like lights and indicators on machines and so forth. And I'm just going through to seeing if everything looks great and tweaking small details, but other than that, this whole scene is complete. And let me know if this style for time-lapse videos is helpful. If so, I will continue doing these for future time-lapse videos. But with that, I hope you enjoyed the video, and I'll catch you on the next one.